Hi, this is Yucca with our 7th guide on Java development, and in our previous 2 tutorials I introduced you to package statements. Package statements tell us in which directory structure this user class file that we're developing belongs, and introduced you to import statements, which, if you picture yourself with the concept of that you're an author of a library of books or code or Java class files, the import statement essentially you borrow class files from other directories and so forth, and package statements tell us where our class files belong, in which directory structures and so forth. Now, in continuing to look at a class file and how it's structured from top to bottom, I'm going to introduce you to the third component of a typical Java class file. So the first components that we see are package statements. Then we have one or multiple import statements, and we've covered some of the keywords. Keywords like package and import are words that you cannot use for other than these purposes in your Java code. They have special meaning to the Java compiler when the Java compiler converts your code, handwritten code, into bytecode, which is understood by the Java virtual machine, and thus you cannot use these words for other than their purposes and so forth. Now, the third component of a typical Java class file is something we refer to as Javadoc. Now, Javadoc is one of the forms of documentation that you can provide in your Java class definition, or actually Javadoc, the first bit of Javadoc that you have precedes your Java class definition. Now, your class definition of a Java class file, it includes your class declaration, which is your first line as follows, which I'm highlighting here. The first line here specifies that this is a public Java class. Now, this is relevant because all code which is publicly accessible, or any code which may or may not be accessible to other developers, should have Javadoc, which we're covering in this tutorial. Now, access modifiers like this public keyword over here that I'm highlighting for you specify restrictions or ability of your code to be used by other developers and other code based on packaging and directory structure. So our class declaration here, which forms the first line of our class definition, which is everything including the class declaration and everything between the opening and closing bracket, we need to document anything which is public. Now, I've specified that Java is object orientated. We have fields and variables which specify data and state of our Java objects, and we have methods and functions which alter the state of the data, which is represented by fields and variables. And in the real world, you can picture variables and fields as nouns, and methods and functions like the main method here you can picture as verbs, and they alter the data or the variables and the state of the data which is located in your Java class files. Now, the third component we're going to look at here is Javadoc. Now, Javadoc is a tool which provides documentation on how to use your Java code and how to use your Java class, and it's done as follows. And we document our class files, and all Javadoc is structured as follows. It begins with a /, 2 asterisks, and for each line, and you can have multiple lines of Java documentation, you begin with an asterisk, and you can have many lines of Java documentation, and eventually, to finish off the Java documentation, you have a asterisk and a / which completes the Java documentation. Now, we document our Java class files or our class definition, and one of the benefits of using an integrated development environment like IntelliJ IDEA is you can view the documentation for the class file if you hover over the class name, which must match the file name, through Control Q, and it tells us a little bit about the Java class file for now. The only information it currently provides us with is that it belongs to the org.thejavabar.db package, and we can extend upon that by beginning to include some documentation as follows. So let's document the user class file that we're creating and the purpose of it, not just for ourselves but for other developers that we may work with, or for anyone else who may be able to use our code in the future. So we're going to document it as follows. This user class file represents a user of this application. And once we've done that, once again in my development environment, I can view the documentation, and everything that I typed in here, it tells us here, and this will eventually form part of our Java documentation. Now what Java documentation is well, Javadoc is a tool which is launched on your code, and if you go to your Java development kit, and mine is located on my C drive in my program files and under Java, and if I go to my development kit and in the binary, you'll see that I have an executable or an application here which includes the Javadoc executable, and this tool is used to convert the documentation that you provide in your Java class files into HTML format, which will look exactly like this once you've completed the Javadoc command on your code. So the Java language API here that you see here, it documents Java code, or it documents the development kit for you, and this is the purpose behind Javadoc. It's to document code to yourself and to other developers that may use your code, and everything once you've launched the Javadoc tool will eventually land up in a HTML format like you see here, and you can click through packages like the java.language object. Everything in Java, every class that you create will eventually extend from java.language object class file. We get to what extends means, and that in upcoming tutorials. Now I'm going to look at more of Java documentation. So I've provided a little bit of documentation for my user class here. It tells myself and other developers the purpose of the user class, and because this is a public class, it's accessible to all other developers and it should be documented. It's mandatory that the more accessible your code is to other developers, to document it so that other developers know how to use it. And the accessibility of classes, methods and fields is determined by the access modifiers, which I'll get into in upcoming tutorials. Now Javadoc does not just include documentation that you write as I've written as follows. There are a couple of special signs, annotations that we can provide, which won't be converted to part of the documentation when we launch the Javadoc executable and we target it at our code. And as an example, all of these annotations, if you type in and I'm using integrated development environment here, I get a couple of pop-ups here which provide me with options. Now all of these options do not form part of your final Javadoc documentation. So as an example, I'm going to provide my author name here, and if I use my integrated development environment, Control Q, and if I view the user class file, you'll see that I get what I typed in over here. I get a pop-up here, but the author is not included. That's because it's a special annotation and it has no meaning eventually to the Javadoc command. Now in keeping up with what I said and stated, anything which is public, including methods like our main method, and any variables and fields that we include on our class files, and I'll get to that, I'll get to fields and that in possibly the next tutorial. And because this method, the main method, is public, we need to document it. That's in keeping with the standards of Java development. So /2 asterisks, and we're going to document the main method. I'm just going to go to the method name, Control Q, and you view that the main method has no documentation on how it's to be used, which is terrible. Other developers, well, obviously they know what the main method is, or they should. The main method is used for every Java application, needs an entry point, and the main method provides the entry point to begin your Java application. This method launches the application, and go to the method name, and you'll see what I typed in here forms part of the declaration, or forms part of the Javadoc. Now, to burn the concept in here, I'm going to go into the system class file, which is located in the Javadoc package, using my integrated development environment, and I'm doing this to show you how the system class file is documented in the official development kit. And I'm going to click into the system class here, and as an example, you can look at all the documentation here. Well, the package statement here, it tells us which package the system class file belongs. It belongs in the Java.language package, and it has many import statements here which import class files from other directories and so forth. And one thing, this method here as an example is private, and it doesn't really need to be documented because it can't be used by other developers. But let's go and look at a public method here. You see that the array copy method, which I'm highlighting for you here, or I'll highlight for you, is public, and it should be documented so that other developers know how to use it. And let's look at the documentation here. It's quite extensive just for the array copy method, and everything that I've highlighted here, note the closing /, and for each line which forms part of the Java documentation you see asterisks, and it starts with a / and 2 asterisks. Let's look at how the method is documented here. It tells us that it copies an array from the specified source array and so forth. Now let's go look online how the system.java class file documents the array copies method, and we should see exactly what I've highlighted here as part of the method documentation for array copies. So I'm going to go into the Java.language package here, and if you just give me a sec, so go to the Java.language package, I'm going to locate the system class file, and we get a summary of all the fields. Now these fields, most likely because they are publicly accessible, they are documented for that purpose because we as developers are able to use them. They are provided by the development kit, and we need to know how to use them. So documentation is provided for these fields, and we're going to go to our method summary here, and we're going to look. Here's the array copy method, and copies an array from the specified source array and so forth. It tells us what this method is used for, and if we go back to our integrated development environment, copies an array from the specified source array, which verifies what Javadoc eventually lands up as. So eventually when you launch the Javadoc tool on your code, all documentation that you provided in your class file will land up eventually like this. And just to mention finally, any code which is public and accessible to other developers should have Javadoc attached to it so that those developers know how to use the various the code that you provide and so forth. So that's the third component of a typical Java class file. Firstly, once again, we have our package statements, tells us where this Java class file, the user class, belongs. We have our import statements, which import classes from other packages. You don't need the java.language package imported. Everything is provided by default, and we don't just document our class definition or the complete class. We also document methods or fields which are publicly accessible, like the main method here. And you can also, if you're using integrated development environment, you can click through directory structures, package structures, and so forth. But the purpose of this tutorial is to show you Javadoc, what it's used for, and eventually what you'll end up with is documentation like you see here, which describes your Java code, not just to yourself but other developers. Now, Javadoc is not the only commenting that you can provide. It's in your Java code. You also have block comments and inline comments, which I'll get into in future tutorials. Final thing about Javadoc and any other documentation in your Java class files is that they do not form part of your code which is relevant to the Java virtual machine, other than with Javadoc, which you can launch the Javadoc command on, which will give you the end result of HTML documentation on how your code is structured and how it is to be used. Now, that's the 7th tutorial on Java development. In the next tutorial I'll introduce you to constructors and Java class files. Thank you for watching.